Then we monitor the ambient air, so we can measure whether we're meeting those standards or not. I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. Then EPA decides, or actually sets, the areas that are not meeting the standard based on our data, and they establish compliance deadlines. So if we're exceeding a standard, then we have a set schedule that we have to meet to put programs into place to achieve those standards. So we develop, the EPD develops the attainment plan, which involves rules, emissions inventory, a lot of air modeling, and then we put that plan into place through our permitting and inspection enforcement programs, our I&M program, which are mobile emissions, and some other things. Then we measure our progress, of course, with it shows up in our ambient data. And then ultimately, EPA would redesignate areas to attainment, the ones that were not attaining the standards, and then it goes back in the circle. So, and oftentimes, or sometimes, we don't achieve one standard before the standard gets changed again at the federal level. So we're kind of tend to be chasing, and those usually get tighter. So we're kind of chasing a receding goal sometimes. Monitor and report air quality. We have a system of about 53 monitoring sites in Georgia. Obviously, we have more of those in the Atlanta metro area. That's where we would have our biggest challenges as far as air quality goes. But we monitor across the state to ensure we're meeting the standards. We do some air quality forecasting. You'll see some of these things in the paper or on the radio when we have an air quality alert. That basically comes from our data. We do meteorological monitoring, so we're looking at weather patterns because it does have an impact on us. And then we produce an annual report. Most of our data is actually online if somebody wants to go look at it, but we do produce this annual report that talks about longer trends and things of that nature. Our permitting program is a big part of our program. We have 3,500 facilities in Georgia that have active air permits, and 400 or so of those are large, what we call the Title V permits. So those are very complex and involved permits, very lengthy documents. And permitting is probably where we work closely with our economic development people in Georgia, because people really can't do major projects, build new facilities without an air permit from us first. So we end up being in the line of sort of their whole project schedule at the front of the line. So we work very closely with the industry and those seeking the permits. We have certainly when we issue permits, it's a very public process. Those are out for public comment. Oftentimes we have public hearings, so we take input from the public and other interested parties before we finalize those permits. But that runs quite well now, and we work a lot on making sure we get timely and high quality permits. Compliance assurance is where we go out and we do inspections to make sure the facilities are meeting their permit requirements. A lot of that involves on-site inspections. Most of the regulated facilities have to send in regular reports, monthly, quarterly, and so we have people reviewing those, and we take appropriate enforcement action for non-compliance when that's called for. We also have a separate group is our Small Business Environmental Assistance Program. A lot of the smaller businesses really have trouble or sometimes challenges sort of understanding the requirements and what they're really required to do. They just don't have the staff to be able to do that. So we have a group that works with them and actually helps them get a permit or resolve a compliance issue outside our normal sort of permitting and enforcement process. Another big part of our program is focused on mobile sources, and that's in the metro Atlanta area. All of these, I'm sure for those of you who live in metro Atlanta, you have your car tested every year. Well, we're sort of running that program. We are running that program. And we test about 2.5 million automobiles every year. And we also oversee the actual inspection stations to make sure they're doing the job properly. And certainly in terms of achieving our air quality goals in Atlanta, effective IM program is critical for that, because that is a large contribution to the air quality in Atlanta. There is a lot of progress in that area. Certainly cars are getting cleaner as they get newer, and the fuels are getting cleaner as well on a national level. So we are making some good progress there. The air quality is improving in Georgia. This is one of our criteria that we keep up with. PM 2.5 is just an acronym. It means fine particulate. So it's sort of fine dust is a way to look at it, to think about it. And these design values, the horizontal bars on there, are the federal standard. So we had a 97, we had a standard of 15. In 2012, we have a standard of 12. So that's the most recent particulate standard. And you can see the trends here. These are our monitoring stations across the state. And back in the 2002 time period, many of our monitoring stations were exceeding that 97 standard. But today you can see how much progress we've made. In 2014, every monitor in the state is meeting the 2012 standard, the most recent standard. So that just shows you the progress that we've been making. Ozone is sort of our hardest pollutant to deal with, and that again is mostly focused on Metro Atlanta. Again, you see the federal standards. There's a 97 standard of 84 and the 2008 standard of 75. Most of the monitoring stations we have around the state meet that 2008 standard, but Metro Atlanta is not. And right now, actually, EPA has already proposed to tighten that standard further. So that'll be coming up in the next year or so. So we still have challenges, certainly in Metro Atlanta, and we actually could have some challenges in some of the other areas, depending on where they set that standard. Just a point of reference here, the rule they proposed in October or December rather, was to set a standard somewhere between 0.065 or 65 on this chart and 70. So if you go down to that 65 or 70, you see several of those other areas, at least currently, are at or above that standard. So that would be obviously more things we'd have to look at, some broader areas outside the Atlanta metro area. But the overall story is still good. I mean, this chart and the one I showed you before, shows us great improvement in air quality. And you know, I don't know what the air quality was in decades ago, but since we've been measuring it, this is as good an air quality as we've had. So we were able to get Atlanta under that 97 standard. So I think people years past I thought we never would have gotten there, but it just shows the progress we've made, and we're not that far over the current standard. So that's been through a lot of effort by a lot of people, and a lot of improvements in technology. Certainly some improved emissions controls have been part of that, both for the stationary sources, industrial sources, power plants, and the mobile sources. This is a slide actually that EPA generated. This is a national slide that just kind of goes to the point of that you can have economic development and growth and improved air quality at the same time. So you can see the gross domestic product, vehicle miles traveled, population, all have increased dramatically since the 80s. Energy consumption actually looks like it's kind of flattened out there in the most recent years, but at the same time emissions have decreased substantially. Well, I had this slide, like I said, from EPA, and this is a national figure, so I had some of our people pull together what this looks like in Georgia. So Georgia, picture And some of this is even better. Our gross domestic product is much higher than the national average. I think our population increase is higher than the national average. And our emissions still have dropped substantially. So you can see that Georgia sort of mirrors that national trend. Our top challenges going forward, there's some greenhouse gas standards for existing power plants that EPA proposed last year. Those standards would be final midsummer. We don't have an exact date. They originally were supposed to be final in June, and EPA has said they're pushing that back a few months. And then Georgia would have to come up with a plan of how to meet that standard. Those rules certainly will be subject to legal challenges and other activities. So it's going to be probably with us for quite a few years before we figure out exactly what we're doing on that standard. And that standard, the way it's proposed, would set a target we would have to meet in 2030. So it's a long-range type goal. I mentioned the tightening ozone standard. We believe that standard, EPA has said that standard will be out in October. And then we just have to sort of react to it depending on what it is. And then we would go into a planning process soon after that to figure out what we have to do to meet that standard. We have some challenges with our Title V, our permitting program. We collect fees from the permitted industries based on their emissions, and that funds that program. And with the decline in emissions, we have decline in funding. So we're working with the people that are the regulated entities and trying to figure out how we're going to go forward with that. We have a little bit of time, but we'll be working on that in earnest this year with that group. And then we also have a more recent standard on sulfur dioxide, which is a 1-hour standard, which means it's a short-term standard. Most of these are longer-term, 8 hours or even annual numbers. So this tends to be more point source targeted. So it's like a power plant or a pulp mill or something would have more challenges meeting this standard than somewhere else. So we're working through that. We've engaged some of those facilities already. Timeline on that it's a little bit unclear because of some litigation that's pending, but we are working on that and already with the industry, and hopefully we won't have too many problems there, but it's a little bit unclear at the moment. So I'm going to turn it over now to Jeff Cowan, who's going to run through the land branch program.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Cowan, Chief of the Land Protection Branch within EPD. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having us over to give a brief overview of what Land Protection Branch does. First off, our goals are for productive land, healthy citizens, a vibrant economy, and we do that through our programs by preventing harmful releases to the land, restoring land when needed, and promoting resource conservation. And I just wanted to go over some of the programs that we deal with. First off, solid waste management. The Comprehensive Solid Waste Management Act requires us to ensure safe management of waste in the state, to reduce waste, and monitor and clean up sites if we do have problems. The Comprehensive Act requires us to maintain 10 years of disposal capacity for municipal solid waste and construction demolition in the state. We currently have over 33 years of capacity in 104 landfills, and we're monitoring over 300 closed landfills to clean up. And here's some pictures of the trash being smashed in the landfill to get the proper capacity out of it. The bottom left hand is a constructed line municipal solid waste landfill. We try to work on the gullies, and we monitor these sites. This is a methane monitoring point on the bottom right. Scrap tire management. Our goal in scrap tire management is to assure that we don't have the picture on the top right happening where we have a pile of tires that are dumped and catch on fire. What we want to, and also the top left is a picture of another pile of dumped tires where mosquitoes were a big issue, so we don't want those things to happen. What we do want those to happen is, in bottom left, getting them collected and back and processed on the bottom right and turn them into usable products that you see. The hiking trail in the middle picture at Amicalola State Falls is made out of recovered scrap tires. waste reduction and recycling. We have this program is to try to reduce waste and get it back into commerce. I did bring one prop. Over 1/3 of the drinking water bottles recycled in North America are made into carpet in Georgia. We have over 100 businesses that use recovered materials in their feedstocks. We also have one of the largest aluminum recycler here in Georgia, and we have 16 paper mills that use recovered paper in their operations. This just shows some things. We also do in this group, we do environmental education for the children. You know, we want to bring the children up doing the right thing. I come up, you know, we always took everything to the trash dump and landfill, and then I worked for EPD, and I recycled, but my parents would not recycle. It took their grandchildren to teach them to recycle, and now they're very adamant about it. Surface mining. The surface mining program regulates over 800 permitted facilities, mining many minerals in Georgia. What I have here is a picture of a kaolin operation operating on the top left. The top right is the operation after it's been reclaimed. Some of the products that this manufactured kaolin goes into is china, paint, and this on the bottom right is proppants that go in the oil and gas industry, in the fracking industry to open the holes up. Surface mining in Georgia is responsible for over 10,000 direct jobs and almost $2 billion to our economy. Our underground storage tank program is in place to regulate leaking underground storage tanks. We have over 29,000 tanks within the state at almost 10,000 facilities that we regulate. Our prevention component of that is to require operator certification, perform inspections every 3 years, and we're sort of looking at that. Some of these facilities may need to be inspected more often. Enforce standards for tank installation. If you don't put it in properly, it's going to leak. We also administer the underground storage tank trust fund that these facilities can use as their financial assurance. They pay into the fund, and then the fund helps them clean up if they do have any leaking problems. And we also oversee cleanups for people that are not in the fund. Also, we can do that through our contractors. Pictures here, top right is tanks that were removed in our 98 upgrade. The bottom right is a system operating that's cleaning up the gasoline in the groundwater. We have a lead paint and asbestos program. It's mainly in place to protect children and workers. We certify lead-based paint individuals and firms. We accredit training providers. We license asbestos abatement contractors. We educate these contractors. Along with EPA on asbestos, we investigate complaints. Our lead complaints are investigated through our program here. We inspect target housing and child-occupied facilities, and we also conduct the asbestos in school inspections at schools in the state through this program. And this is some pictures they showed. Mainly for lead, you're protecting the kids and the workers, but a lot of our pre-78 facilities have lead paint on them, and when they're renovated, they have to do that. And also, we try to make sure that the lead and asbestos is not dumped, is the picture you see there. And we put out education material, as you see in the bottom right, Renovate Right. Then we have our hazardous waste management program, which is to protect land and groundwater through prevention. This program does all the compliance of small quantity generators, large quantity generators, used oil facilities that where that's collected. They investigate complaints. They also issue permits to facilities that treat and store hazardous waste. We currently do not have a facility that disposes of hazardous waste in the state, but there's some legacy hazardous waste that we work on. This group also is responsible for the Department of Defense unit. They oversee the cleanup of over 26 Department of Defense sites in the state through a DSMOA grant with the Army and through the military. The pictures here, the top right is actually our manager inspecting some drums at a facility. The bottom right is a cleanup at a former industrial site that was contaminated. And our folks do go out when drums are found and take care of those. Bottom left. Then we have our hazardous waste corrective action program. They are responsible for doing the cleanup at former RCRA hazardous waste sites, resource conservation recovery sites. And they also review our risk assessment in this program. But with this program, as you see, there's some folks here looking at some tanks and doing some cleanups. But this program is responsible for such facilities as the Tronox facility in Chatham County that we toured, and also the LCP facility in Brunswick that's on the national priority list. Then I want to go into our state cleanup programs. Under our Hazardous Sites Response Act, we have our hazardous sites inventory. Some of our facilities don't reach the level of being on the federal Superfund, so the legislature created the state Superfund in 1992, and we look at these facilities on here to make sure that they're cleaned up also. There's about 500 facilities on that inventory. About 130 of are legacy sanitary landfills from local governments, but then there's about 400 that we're looking at cleaning up. These pictures show a facility right here in Atlanta, Simmons Plating, that we're working on through progress to clean up. It's now been demoed, and we'll go to the next phase of cleaning up underneath it. We have our voluntary remediation program that the legislature created in 2009, and this program was created to do voluntary and timely cleanup of sites that may be on our inventory and may not be on our inventory. Some folks just want to clean up their property and put it in a better place for redevelopment. So this program works with these folks that want to volunteer clean up, and our goal is to clean up in 5 years, and we monitor that status, and we invoice the applicants for our work to do that. Just some of the pictures here. One is a hydro punch doing some sampling at a voluntary cleanup site. The top right is a marker where we have a restrictive covenant. On some of these sites, we can just restrict the use of groundwater, and that protects it. The bottom left is where we're doing vapor intrusion because these contaminants in groundwater can come up into the building, so we are mitigating vapor there. And the bottom right is where they're drilling some holes to do some in situ sampling to try to expedite the cleanup at this facility. And the last one I want to talk about is our brownfield redevelopment program. We worked very closely last year with Representative Williams to make some changes to the act that's been around since 2002, but this is a very popular program. We have received almost 600 applications and approved over almost 400 of these things for redevelopment. I've got pictures of here. One of our biggest ones currently is the redevelopment of the Hateville Ford plant into Porsche North America. And if you've driven south on 75, you'll see that it's pretty much built with the windows in it, the tracks going in. Some of our other facilities are the Beltline. The Beltline is one of our brownfield facilities. Ponce City Market, which is the former Sears building that's being restored into a market, office space, residential, and retail space. So these are some of the things that we work on here within Land Protection Branch. And I'll be glad to answer any questions we get done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jack Kapp. I am the EPD branch chief of the Watershed Protection Branch. And Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having us here this morning. Water impacts nearly every aspect of our lives, so much so that many times we may not even think about it. But it is a precious and limited resource. The many regulatory and voluntary programs that we administer are designed to protect that precious and limited resource, to support a healthy environment and a healthy economy. These programs are a combination of federal programs that we are delegated to implement under federal oversight, as well as state programs that originated from laws passed by the General Assembly. We're blessed in our state to have an abundance of resources that support our population, support our economy, our agricultural activities, recreation, enjoyment, as well as the health of our wildlife. We have both surface water and groundwater resources that we're able to take advantage of. We do rely more on surface water in the northern part of the state, and we rely more upon groundwater in the southern part of our state, but we do use both in each. Everything for us really starts with the water quality standards. The protection of our water quality and our surface water is through these water quality standards. First of all, each water body is given a designated use. Then there are criteria that specify the maximum allowable levels of contaminants that can be present in order to be protective of that designated use. Common criteria are dissolved oxygen, pH, temperature, bacteria, nutrients, and toxic pollutants such as metals. These criteria are generally numeric, but in some cases can be narrative if a numeric standard is impractical. Federal regulations require us to evaluate and update, if necessary, our water quality standards every 3 years. This is typically an ongoing process with multiple opportunities for stakeholder input that culminates with rulemaking through the DNR board. We do monitoring across the state to primarily assess whether or not we are meeting those water quality standards. If we have data demonstrating that we are not meeting a water quality standard in any particular stream segment, then we are required to publish that information in a report titled Water Quality in Georgia, which is also commonly referred to as the 305/303 list of impaired waters. This report is required to be published every 2 years. When a stream segment is listed as impaired, it requires us to develop what's called a TMDL, or Total Maximum Daily Load. And this is the total amount of a pollutant that can be discharged into a water body without violating that water quality standard. This includes assessing where the contributions are coming from and allocating amounts that will comply with the water quality standard to the various sources, which could be a combination of point sources and non-point sources. Point sources would generally be given a specific discharge limitation in their permit, which would effectuate compliance with the water quality standard. Non-point sources are generally asked to implement best management practices that will result in less pollution being discharged into our water bodies. We go through that process with the goal of achieving the water quality standard. If for some reason we don't make it, then we circle back around and begin that evaluation process again. Well, I mentioned that we do implement a very wide variety of programs, and so I'm just going to touch very briefly on some of the more prominent ones. We have water withdrawal permitting programs, and that includes both groundwater and surface water permitting programs, and programs for both farm and non-farm sources. And we do administer them in that fashion. So we do delineate groundwater versus surface water, and we do delineate non-farm uses and non-farm uses. The map in the upper right shows you there's a dot for every farm permit that we have issued, and so that will give you a sense of where the abundance of our agricultural activities are going on in the state. The red dots are surface water and the black dots are groundwater. All non-farm permittees are required to report their water usage to us, so we know exactly how much water withdrawal has been permitted, and we know exactly how much water withdrawal is being used. The farm program, we have a metering program that is largely implemented through the Soil and Water Conservation program, where we do get data on agriculture usage as well. The Safe Drinking Water Program is a federal program that we administer under delegation and federal oversight. This regulates the water in our public water systems. And a public water system is any system that serves 25 people. So obviously in the metro areas, we've got very large water systems. In many parts of the state, we have very, very small water systems. So a small trailer park community, for example, could have their own well where they're servicing the trailer parks in that neighborhood, that one single neighborhood. And if it is serving 25 people, it is a public water system required to have a permit, which we regulate. The primary way that we protect safe drinking water is through extensive sampling that is done from the water being put into the distribution systems. The vast majority of those samples end up being analyzed by the EPD lab, but there are some opportunities for systems to use private labs, and so that does go on in our state. We administer a water loss audit program for some of the larger public water systems, so that's not for every public water system, but for those that serve more than 3,300 people, they are required to do an annual audit through a law passed by the General Assembly, and that is designed for them to get a better understanding of what's going on in those systems and to provide them good information for making wise investments to reduce those losses. We inventory all dams in our state on a 5-year basis, and we permit and inspect those dams that could result in the loss of life if that dam were to fail. And there are about 500 such structures where that is the case. If that dam were to fail, it could cause a loss of life.
Could you tell the committee the Class 1, Class 2, Class 3?
Sure. Well, we've got Class 1 and Class 2 for dams, and 1 is a dam that, if it were to fail, could cause a loss of life. And a Category 2 is one that would, if it were to fail, while it may have extensive property and environmental damage, would not cause a loss of life. And so the state law requires us to survey the dams every 5 years and to categorize them as either Category 1 or Category 2. Smaller structures, which you could see with a pond, technically under the law might not really be considered a dam. A dam has to be, a certain height or a certain acre feet of water behind it. So some structures are technically not dams. A few more highlights on some of the regulatory programs that we administer. Wastewater, so if you're discharging water to surface water, you must get an NPDES permit. We also have wastewater systems that do land application, right? So they have spray heads and they're spraying onto a field, and so they don't actually discharge to a surface water. That's regulated under a state program. Because the federal program only regulates that water which is discharged to surface water. But we regulate both of those programs. Stormwater, large municipalities that have stormwater systems are required to have permits, and they do monitoring of that stormwater to make sure it's protective of water quality standards. The same is true for industrial sites that have a substantial impervious area. They're required to have industrial stormwater permits. General construction, so where we have a development going on, a development is required to get a general permit, which requires them to submit a notice of intent along with their plans to do that development, and they have to comply with our general construction permit. We also administer a stream buffer variance program. State law protects buffers of 25 feet and 50 feet in some cases for trout streams. There are occasionally reasons why people have to intrude upon that buffer, and the law does allow that in certain cases, and so we administer that program to ensure that they meet the requirements of the law and are doing everything that they can to minimize their impact on the buffer. And then in partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers, we administer a 401 water quality certification program for situations that involve dredging and filling. Okay, as I wrap up, a couple of specific challenges that we have in our state with regarding to water issues. One is in the lower Flint Basin. Due to concerns, well, first of all, obviously the lower Flint is a very important region for our agricultural activities in our state. Concerns over the ability of our water resources to support additional withdrawals in that area led to a permit suspension of new withdrawals in 2012, and that's noted by the shaded area of that map on the screen. Last year, the legislature made changes to the Flint River Drought Protection Act through Senate Bill 213. Those changes included needed flexibility in the drought declaration and auction process. It also included effective irrigation efficiency requirements for all irrigation activities in that shaded area of the state. And it also included protection of augmented stream flows in order to protect endangered or threatened aquatic life. I'm pleased to say that we have, at EPD, we have completed the rulemaking process to implement those changes in law that were passed by the Assembly last year. One unique feature of that particular state law, the Flint River Drought Protection Act, is it does require EPD rules to be submitted to the General Assembly at the beginning of the next session, which we just have had start. If the Assembly were to issue a resolution of disapproval, then those rules would not go into effect. So we have submitted those rules to the Assembly, and we're obviously hopeful that it will go through the session without any such disapproval. One other area of note is on the coast. We do have a significant challenge with saltwater intrusion coming into the Floridan aquifer that we rely upon so much in the southern part of our state for our water resources. And so we have restricted the water withdrawals in that red and yellow shaded areas. And we have, over the past number of years, and we continue to do so, work with the permitted entities in those areas to reduce their withdrawals. And so that process is ongoing. We have had good success in getting them to reduce their withdrawals. And that will be a challenge that we face moving forward for a number of years. Just a quick thing to say about the Governor's Water Supply Program. EPD does a number of things to assist and support those activities. Certainly we are active in the regulatory aspects where those projects have to get permits from us. We do have technical expertise that we use to help ensure the proper development of those projects. And so that is something that our staff is engaged in. Regional water planning is something that we really like and support. Just a couple of highlights on that. The regional water councils were appointed in 2009. We believe that gives a really good voice for local communities to have a say in how their water resources are managed. In each of those councils, we have an EPD liaison person assigned to that council to support them and to provide guidance to them. Of course, the Metro District is a little different in that it was uniquely created by statute, but it has plans as well that need to be developed and approved by EPD, and we support those functions as well. And so we're looking forward to the next round of plans that they will be developing, and we will be guiding them and supporting them as they go through that process. And then I'll wrap up with a quick note about some of our voluntary programs that we do from an outreach standpoint. Our Adopt a Stream program is our program where volunteers get trained by EPD in order to learn how to take water samples, and so they can go out in their own neighborhood and take water samples and get those results analyzed and then uploaded to EPD's database. So we'll have even more data on what is going on across the state with regards to water quality. Our Rivers Alive program is our water cleanup program, where EPD supports many great organizations across the state that go out into their community and clean up trash out of the river. The picture there in the upper right is actually an EPD cleanup that we did in the South River. That was a great way for us to partner with the local environmental group that cares so much about the South River. And then a couple other quick things. We have a water education program for teachers where EPD staff will teach teachers on how to do some coursework for kids. And then we support an art program called River of Words, where kids can do art projects and poetry talking about how much they love their environment. And so thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Bert for the
Thank you.
districts.
And we're getting up close to our 9 o'clock hour. For those of you who have another obligation, we do not have anybody following us for this room, so we can move along. And then, of course, our committee members know the people now to contact. But if you have to leave, I certainly understand. I think we need to gather all this information, so I'll be quiet and you take over, and we can hear rapid speech pretty well.
Thank you. I'm Bert Langley, Director of Compliance for EPD, and Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, that we appreciate the opportunity to give you way more information than you probably can take in any short time. As part of my duties, I manage the district offices for EPD. We have 6 district offices staffed by a mixture of environmental specialists and engineers. There's about 99 to 100 people in those offices. They're located around the state. We have the Mountain District office in Cartersville, office in Augusta, Athens, Coastal District in Brunswick, Albany, and then we have a satellite office in Metro Atlanta to do with the issues there. You've heard most about what EPD does at the wholesale level. The districts work at the retail level. We're the ones on the ground working with people day to day in their communities. We deal with all the industries as well as the citizens. Our goal is to ensure compliance with the various aspects of the law. We do that mainly through technical assistance and voluntary agreements, trying to reach compromises to get people into compliance. Our last tool is enforcement. It's the one we don't like to use, but sometimes we end up with it. You see, we have 100 people or so in the district. We have a lot of facilities. We do most of the facility inspections for EPD. Over almost 1,000 wastewater facilities, 2,500 drinking water facilities. Any of the smallest facilities that use groundwater, we end up inspecting. Almost 3,000 air quality facilities. Land disturbance sites, over 4,000 of them. These take a tremendous amount of our time. And complaints. On a yearly basis, we get between 2,000 and 3,000 complaints in the district offices. We inspect every single complaint and investigate it that we get. And they can range from very valid, very big issues to somebody not liking their neighbor. And we still have to deal with those. Our facility inspectors will look at various wastewater facilities, drinking water, solid waste facilities. We do all the landfill inspections pretty much for the state. And the part that doesn't really show up here is that we have specialists trained as generalists. They do all of these. Any one person may inspect a drinking water facility in the morning, a landfill that afternoon, and then investigate a complaint later that evening. We do a lot of the underground storage tank facility inspections, where we're actually working with the owners and operators to ensure they're in compliance. Air quality facilities, dusting. Dusting is a constant problem that we deal with. These are the kind of complaints we get, and we work with industries to keep that from occurring. A large portion of our time is spent with erosion sedimentation and the stormwater construction permit. As we get more and more building going on, there's more issues that arise with these. These things are visible. This is where a lot of complaints come into our office. People can see construction sites. They can see problems. Our issues are to get people to deal with it. This has always been a challenge because starting with the inception of this permit, we're dealing with people who have never had interaction with EPD before. They've never been regulated by a permit, and they really didn't understand what they were needing to do. So it's been a tremendous outreach to get these folks understanding their requirements. We find a lot of the scrap tire problems. We inspect scrap tire facilities, and we find a lot of the dumps. And as you can see, sometimes they're large, sometimes they're small. Our goal is to keep them more like the ones on the left and avoid the ones on the right. As you may know, large piles of scrap tires have the habit of spontaneously combusting late at night, and that's something we just don't want to have happen. We do a lot of other things in the district offices. Technical assistance is our biggest goal. We spend a lot of time working with communities and individuals, a lot of our municipalities, to get them through this regulatory process they're dealing with. We do drinking water permitting. The only permitting we do out of the districts are for the small drinking water facilities. We're on the ground with the people. We can see what's going on. We can work with the engineers. We have engineers in the offices reviewing the plans and getting these permits ready. Industrial stormwater, pesticide permits, CAFO operations, all these fall in the district offices, and we do a good bit of outreach as we can. We work at Coast Fest, we work with a lot of the different schools, but frankly in recent years that's decreased simply as our resources have decreased. The complaints, a complaint can be something that we end up spending an hour on, or in some cases years. They can range from a neighbor being unhappy that his next door neighbor is burning leaves to somebody actually has found a major industrial problem where somebody has dumped things. We investigate every complaint as they come in within a 10-day period. We have action underway trying to get a resolution. This is where you will probably have more opportunity to deal with our folks in actually on the ground. They are creative in coming to resolutions of most of these, but this is also the time when more often than not we end up dealing with individuals, not businesses, not municipalities, but some individual who has gotten in a situation they don't need to be with our regulations. Big part of the district office is also we operate our emergency response team. Emergency response has always been a priority with EPD. We have a full-time team of emergency responders. Their job, 24/7, we have somebody available to take calls, find out what's going on, and decide what role EPD needs to play in any sort of emergency that occurs around the state. We get all kinds of things. Fires are a big issue, obviously. When we get notified, our duty officer has the ability to reach out to all sorts of places in the state. We maintain cooperation with all these people so we all know each other and how to deal with things, and decide whether it's something we can just do over the telephone or whether we need a body on the ground. If we have somebody that's needed there, we dispatch one of our responders anywhere in the state 24/7. You've had a bad day if we have to come to your site. Our goal is to make that day better. We very seldom take any sort of enforcement when there's been an emergency. Our role is to get things back where they need to be, get compliance with the law, and help you to get through a process that you've probably never had the opportunity to go through, which is how do you deal with a major event at your facility. We've done it. We've been there a lot. We've seen a lot of them, things like these drums. How do you deal with that? A plant manager, that's probably something he hopes he never needs to know. Our folks do. They work with the cleanup contractors, they work with our federal facilities, they work with the actual responsible party to guide them through a system of getting the emergency over with, getting a cleanup underway, to get done what needs to be done, and to keep them out of any additional problems that can arise. Very minor things that can be done at the beginning of an emergency can save people sometimes tens of thousands of dollars on the other end, and that's one of our goals. We do train derailments. We're some of those fools that actually drive toward fires instead of away from them. We do fish kills. We investigate every fish kill that comes into the state with our wildlife resources partners, looking for causes. Many of our fish kills are natural. A lot of them are not. And fish kills are about the only place where we can guarantee if you've caused a fish kill, we will be talking about enforcement actions later. That's just a given. When there's a large emergency, the State Operations Center is activated. Our folks staff that, and that's where EPD starts spreading out. Our emergency response team people are trained in dealing with the large emergencies at GEMA. They can then reach out to all the other resources in the agency as necessary to get people where they need to be and what they need to do. We spend a lot of time training. We spend a lot of time working with the other state and local agencies as well as the federal agencies. Nothing beats knowing your partners when something of an emergency nature occurs, that you can actually get out and work with people and know who the right one is to do things. That's a whole lot of stuff in a hurry. District offices do a lot of things. They're the ones that most people interact with. You never know what you're going to get when you're in a district office. You never know what you're going to get on the emergency response team, and that's what makes the job interesting. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad to see a title and name was given to what you do because of some situations we had come before our committee a couple of years ago. So it's good that we have a focused area as well. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. To our committee, why don't we give about another 5 minutes or so, those of you who have to leave, I certainly understand. To EPD, I have 9:02 on my clock, so that's pretty good, but there might be some questions, but by way of letting our committee know, you're usually at all our meetings, I believe.
We should always be at our
Okay,
meetings, yes.
so if
And
we-
we're always available whenever, yeah.
Okay, and for our committee for next week, we're going to meet in room 606, and we will hear from GFA and the forestry and the water professionals. So I call this our tutorial to get ready for all the issues that come before us, but we certainly do appreciate it. It is 9 o'clock, so let's just, those who have time, let's ask our questions afterwards, and of course, if there's something to do with a further later meeting, we will do that. But thank you very much for your attendance. I have a number 24 with a burning question. Okay, thank you.